My name is Helen Langley, and the day I slipped on black ice wasn't the day everything changed. It was the day I finally noticed how long I'd been invisible. I wasn't thinking about pain. I was thinking about Ethan, my son, because that's what I always do. I wrapped his favorite scarf around my neck, tucked a cookie in my coat like always, and walked out the door expecting nothing in return. But that fall, it opened something in me. Not just a wound, but a truth. I had given everything, and somehow I had become no one. That morning began like any other. I brewed my usual chamomile tea, wrapped Ethan's blue scarf around my neck, too tight, the way he hated, but warm, and slipped a chocolate chip cookie into my pocket. Just in case school was rough. Just in case he needed comfort, even if he'd never ask. These were the kinds of small things I did daily. Quiet, invisible things. No one noticed them, and I never expected they would. I stopped by my regular cafe, tipped $2 like always, even though the music on the radio was barely loud enough to hear. Then came the forecast. Light snow tonight, temps dropping to 15. That should have been the warning. I should have stayed home. But Ethan would be waiting outside school at 2:30, and I never liked him waiting. By the time I reached Maple Falls Elementary, the sidewalk had transformed. A thin sheet of black ice shimmered just enough to be deadly. My boots were old, soles worn smooth. My knee, already weakened by years of arthritis, buckled the second it hit the edge of that hidden glaze. I didn't fall gently. There was no graceful moment. Just a sharp sting, then burn, then the sound of denim tearing as I hit the ground hard. I didn't cry out. I clenched my jaw, pulled myself up before anyone saw. Blood soaked through my jeans. My knee throbbed like it had its own heartbeat. I could barely stand, but I didn't turn back. Because Ethan was expecting me, and he hated waiting. He stood by the school gate like a tiny general, arms crossed, eyes on the ground. I called his name. He didn't look up, just tossed his backpack in my direction and started walking. I limped after him. Every step screamed. My scarf had loosened, and the wind sliced through the opening in my coat like punishment. But I said nothing. Not once did he ask why I was slow that day. Not once did he look back. When we got home, I barely had time to shut the door before Matthew's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're 10 minutes late." He stood in the hallway, arms crossed like a boss waiting to scold an employee. Melissa brushed past me without looking. "Is dinner going to be ready soon?" she asked like nothing had happened. No one asked why I was limping. No one noticed the blood. I moved through the house like a ghost, dripping melted snow and silence onto the hardwood floor. I peeled off my jeans in the bathroom, revealing the mess: raw skin, dried blood, and a bandage I had to apply with trembling fingers. Upstairs, Ethan was laughing at something on YouTube. Downstairs, the television buzzed with meaningless noise. And in the middle of all of it, I stood, injured, ignored, and suddenly unsure if I still belonged in the home I'd built with my own hands. By the time I bandaged my knee and stepped into the kitchen, the house had already moved on. Melissa was on the couch, phone in hand, legs curled beneath her like a guest instead of a daughter. Matthew sat at the dining table, AirPods in, eyes locked on his laptop. They didn't look up. They never did anymore. There was still leftover casserole in the fridge, but I didn't bother. I boiled a small pot of soup, just enough for one. Not because I wanted to eat alone, but because it had become easier than hoping someone would join me. I pulled out Ethan's old chipped blue bowl, the one he'd once called his special bowl when he was 5. Back then, he used to wrap a dish towel around his shoulders and fly through the kitchen like a superhero. Now, he barely glanced at me when I spoke. I set the bowl down, took a seat, and began to eat. Quietly. The only warmth in the room came from the soup and the space heater humming faintly in the corner. Everything else felt cold, especially them. Then it happened. Matthew, still staring at his screen, muttered under his breath. She's becoming more of a burden every day. He didn't shout it. He didn't say it like he wanted a fight. He said it like it was just a fact. Like I was a line item in a budget he was trying to cut. I froze. I don't even know if he realized I'd heard him. Maybe he didn't care. Melissa didn't say anything. Didn't even look up. Just nodded. Like they'd already talked about it. Like I was something they'd already written off. I lowered my spoon. My hands started to shake. That word, burden, it hit harder than any ice or concrete. It didn't just hurt. It erased everything. All the meals I made, the birthdays, the sick nights, the sleepless years, the endless giving. And suddenly, I was just too much. I finished the soup, washed the bowl, and dried it with the old sunflower dish towel Ethan used to love. I stood there for a long time, rubbing my leg through the fabric of my pants, feeling the fresh bandage beneath. The ache in my knee was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I whispered to myself, barely audible. I wasn't always this invisible. But the house had already answered. It didn't need to scream. It had forgotten me slowly, quietly, one ignored moment at a time. The next morning, the snow had returned, light and soft, like silence falling. My knee still throbbed, but I moved through the ache the way I always had. Melissa had asked me the day before if I could find the holiday plates. I figured maybe doing something useful would make the pain quieter, or at least give it somewhere to go. I headed down to the basement. The air hit colder than expected. Damp, thick with the smell of cardboard and old cedar. I passed by the artifacts of a life built slowly and quietly. Boxes labeled in Carl's handwriting, Ethan's yellowed baby swing, a cracked vase I'd meant to glue for 5 years. The plates were tucked behind a stack of cookie tins. But what caught my eye was something else. A small pale green tin box, dust-covered and floral, with faded pink roses on the lid. I hadn't seen it in years. My hands hesitated at the latch. I already knew what was inside. The recipe box. When I finally opened it, the creak was louder than I expected, like the box was waking up after a long sleep. Inside were dozens of index cards, stained with sauce and thyme. Some were in my handwriting, some in my mother's, looping, graceful script. Others were in Carl's, clumsy and blocky, scribbled with love and stubbornness. Apple crumble, baked mac and cheese, strawberry jam cake, the one Ethan always hated but I made every Christmas anyway. Each card was a snapshot, a chapter of a life I'd kept feeding, one meal at a time. And then I found it. Folded behind the lemon bar recipe, barely held together by creases, was a yellowing note. The ink was faint, but I didn't need to read it. I knew every word by heart. Thanks for keeping me alive. Carl had written it after his first heart surgery, back when I cooked every low-sodium meal and kept the salt shaker hidden like contraband. He never said the words out loud. He just left the note knowing I'd find it someday. I sat down on the basement steps, the tin in my lap, and cried. Not the loud, cinematic kind of cry, but the slow, steady tears that come when grief doesn't need to speak. I wasn't just mourning Carl. I was mourning everything I gave up and everything I became in the process. No one upstairs knew I was sitting there. No one was wondering why I hadn't come back up yet. And somehow, that made the ache even sharper. Later, I carried the box upstairs. I didn't say anything. I just placed it on my lap and stepped outside onto the porch. The world had turned white. The sidewalks, the trees, the roofs. It all looked clean, new, like something waiting to be rewritten. Across the street, Nancy was standing by her walkway, holding something wrapped in a dish towel. "Morning, Helen," she called out. "Thought you might want some peach preserves." I wiped my face and smiled. "That's sweet of you," I said. She noticed the box on my lap. "That your old recipe box?" I nodded. "Just feeling the cold today." I lied. Nancy didn't ask anything else. She just sat beside me, holding the warm mason jar between us, and said nothing. And somehow, that silence felt more loving than anything I'd heard in months. The morning of the school choir performance started tense. The sky outside was a brittle blue, the kind that makes your bones ache before you even leave bed. Ethan's class was set to sing at the town's annual tree lighting ceremony. He'd been excited about it for weeks. At least he was, until I made a mistake. I forgot to iron his white choir shirt. It had always been ready before, pressed, folded, hanging like clockwork. But that morning, somewhere between making cinnamon rolls and frothing almond milk for Melissa's latte, it slipped my mind. Just once. Just one shirt. Matthew's voice hit first. "Where's the damn shirt?" Sharp, loud, already angry. I flinched, hands still wrist-deep in batter. "It's in the laundry room," I called out, trying not to sound as tired as I felt. "I meant to." "You meant to," he repeated, his footsteps growing closer. He appeared in the doorway, holding up the wrinkled shirt like a piece of evidence in a trial I didn't know I was in. "Jesus, Mom, you meant to." Behind him, Ethan stood with his arms crossed, lips tight. "You ruin everything," he said, not with rage, just with that quiet finality that cuts deeper than shouting. Melissa wasn't far behind, arms folded, perfect makeup, cold eyes. "You said you had it, Helen." No one said Mom. No one said thank you. No one asked if I was okay. The warmth of the kitchen felt cruel. The smell of cinnamon hung heavy in the air like an unfinished apology. I turned off the oven. The rolls inside were still pale and doughy. I leaned on the counter, pressing both palms into the tile, trying to hold myself still. Through the kitchen window, I saw Nancy on her porch again, pretending to water a dead plant, phone in the other hand. Watching, maybe. I couldn't tell if I was embarrassed or relieved. The house eventually emptied. Ethan's complaints faded, Melissa's heels clicked down the hallway, and Matthew's laptop bag zipped shut like the closing of a door I could never walk through again. I went upstairs, slowly, knee still aching. In my bedroom, I opened the closet and reached for the navy blue suitcase Carl and I had taken to the Smoky Mountains back in '92. The zipper still stuck on one side. I packed 2 changes of clothes. One photo, me and Carl on the 4th of July. His smile was crooked, my hair too big. We looked like strangers, happy ones. I paused in the hallway, staring at the framed family photos. Not one of them had me in it. The coat hooks near the door never held my coat. That was when I realized the house hadn't just forgotten me. It had erased me. And then, for the first time in years, I said it out loud. Not in anger, but in clarity. "You want so much from me, but you never once asked how I was doing." My voice didn't shake. That night, while the house slept, I rose before the sun. The floorboards didn't creak. It was as if the house had decided to let me go. The kitchen was still wrapped in shadows when I turned on the small lamp above the sink. Its glow barely reached the corners, but it was enough to see what I needed. The drawer near the stove, the stack of stationery untouched for years, and my own handwriting waiting to come back to life. I didn't write a list of failures. I didn't rant or blame. I just asked questions. Simple, sharp ones that had lived in my chest too long. Did you ever really see me? Did it matter when I smiled, or cried, or bled? Did you know I used to dance in this kitchen when no one was home? I signed it simply, Mom. By 7:15, I had showered, dressed, and pulled on my wool coat. Nancy's Subaru hummed in the driveway just like she promised. Before I left, I placed the folded letter in the center of the kitchen table. I set a coaster on top, the one that read, "Home is where your story begins." Fitting, I thought. But this wasn't where my story began. It's where it was ending. I tucked the recipe box into my bag. It felt heavier now, like it had absorbed all the years I couldn't say out loud. All the giving, all the forgetting. Nancy handed me a travel mug as I climbed into the passenger seat. "Cinnamon tea," she said with a soft smile. "Thought you might want something warm." I managed a quiet thank you. The mug warmed my hands, but not yet my chest. We drove in silence. No music, no small talk. Just the kind of silence that respects you enough not to fill the space with noise. At the bank, Mr. Howard greeted me with a gentle smile that surprised me. "Mrs. Langley," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You always handled everything for Carl, didn't you?" I nodded. He never liked paperwork. Mr. Howard didn't ask questions. He simply handed me a clipboard. "I'd like to freeze the joint account," I told him. "The one my son's been dipping into this past year." He didn't flinch. He just gave me a pen. And just like that, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took control. When we stepped back outside, the frost had melted from the sidewalks, but I still felt cold. Not from the weather, from everything I'd left behind that hadn't even noticed I was gone. Nancy glanced over at a red light. "You okay?" I nodded. That was all I had in me. In my lap, I held the recipe box like a life preserver. I whispered, not to Nancy, but to myself. "I hope they read the letter, but it's not for them. It's for me." Back at the cottage, the sun had barely risen when the silence in my old house broke. Matthew burst into the kitchen, coat half on, muttering about needing breakfast. "Mom?" he called. No answer. Melissa followed, eyes on her phone. "She's probably folding laundry." But then she saw it, the letter, held down by that coaster. Matthew's phone rang. His voice dropped. "What do you mean the account's frozen?" Melissa read the letter. Her hands trembled. "She's gone," she said. "She actually left." And for the first time in a long time, the house felt something new. It didn't feel empty. It felt overdue. It took nearly a week for my ears to adjust to the stillness. I hadn't realized how loud my life used to be until the noise stopped. No Ethan yelling from his room about cereal. No Melissa tapping through Instacart for groceries she'd never cook. No Matthew pacing the halls like an executive trapped in a meeting that never ended. Just quiet. Soft tick of a wall clock. An occasional bird call from the trees too stubborn to leave for winter. And the clank of a heater that wheezed like an old man with a grudge. But at least it worked. The cottage belonged to Nancy's late sister, tucked behind a walking trail at the edge of Maple Falls. It was small. Quilted bed, yellowing curtains, chipped paint, and wobbly shelves. But for the first time in decades, the space around me didn't expect anything. It just was. And that was enough. We scrubbed the kitchen together, Nancy singing old Carpenter's tunes and Simon and Garfunkel while I scoured forgotten corners. Her voice was scratchy, but warm. She said baking would heat the place better than the radiator. I didn't argue. I already knew what I'd make. Cinnamon rolls came first. Then an apple pie with a crust that flaked like memory. The scent filled the tiny kitchen and slipped through the cracked window, curling into the winter air like an invitation. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. Then a knock at the door. Our first customer at the farmer's market smiled before I could even speak. They came back the next week. And the week after that, they brought friends. One of them was Mr. Hank, a tall man with a cane, a bomber jacket, and a hat that read "Wine Veteran." His eyes were pale blue and sharp, but tired. After his first bite of a cinnamon roll, he looked up, tilted his head, and said, "This tastes like 1947. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment, but it felt like one. He bought 2 rolls every Saturday after that. "One's for me," he said. "The other's for my wife. She passed in '08, but I still eat hers for her." I didn't say much, just wrapped the rolls with careful hands. Grace doesn't always need words. Nancy handled the tablet, entering orders with fingers that danced across the screen more confidently than mine. I still called it the magic slate. She laughed every time I tapped it like it might explode. Our rhythm was simple. Bake in the morning, walk the trail in the afternoon, sip tea by the window in the evening. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. But this silence? It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. One evening, the tablet buzzed. I expected it to be from the market organizer, but when I played the voicemail, it was Ethan. His voice was quiet, scratchy, uncertain. "Grandma, I miss you. Mommy says you're busy. I told her your pancakes are better than Pop-Tarts. I don't care if they're burnt. I hope you come home." I didn't cry, but something inside me opened, gently, carefully. That night, while Nancy dried the last dish, she looked at me and said softly, "My son hasn't called in 3 years. Guess we raised them too well, huh?" We laughed, but only for a moment. Because in the quiet that followed, I whispered something I hadn't said out loud before. "I used to make pancakes no one wanted. Now strangers line up for my bread." Spring crept into Maple Falls like an apology. Slow, soft, and almost shy. The kind of season that doesn't announce itself, but lets the trees speak for it. One morning, Nancy slid a folded flyer across the table. It was for the spring fair. "You ready to go public?" she asked, a smirk tugging at her mouth. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the flyer. Pastels, banners, cartoon bees. It felt like something meant for someone younger, or maybe someone less tired. But eventually, I nodded. Not out of confidence. Out of clarity. Because I finally had nothing left to prove. That morning, I wore my floral blouse. The one Carl used to say was a bit too cheerful. I wore it anyway. Nancy balanced a tray of cinnamon rolls while I tied pastel ribbons around baskets of bread. We were almost ready to open when the knock came. Not on a booth. On the cottage door. I didn't move at first. I was tying one last ribbon, adjusting it until it sat just right. The knock came again, louder this time. I opened the door slowly, heart already knowing. Matthew stood there, suit rumpled, tie crooked, hair unkempt like he hadn't slept. Behind him, Melissa looked thinner, quieter. She held Ethan's hand. Or maybe he was holding hers. "We didn't know where else to go," Matthew said. His voice had lost its edge. Ethan peeked around Melissa's legs, his eyes damp. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I mean it." I stepped outside and gently closed the door behind me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why now. I simply said, "I loved you all. I still do. But I won't live unloved anymore." They didn't respond. Melissa looked down. Matthew gave a faint nod, as if acknowledging something too heavy to put into words. They turned to leave. Ethan gave a small wave from the back seat. I waved back. Then I walked inside. The kitchen smelled like nutmeg and lemon glaze. Nancy was stirring frosting with the back of a spoon, humming off-key. Above the stove, she had framed a note. The voicemail from Ethan. Typed word for word. She tapped the glass and smiled. "Our freedom started there," she said. And I believed her. The spring fair was busy by noon. Our table sat between a booth selling hand-knit scarves and another offering ladles of butternut squash soup. People lined up for bread, for pie, for stories baked into cinnamon swirls. Mr. Hank showed up in his bomber jacket. He handed me 2 wrinkled dollar bills and said, "Tastes like 1947 again." This time I smiled and said, "Then I'll make sure you never forget it." That afternoon I looked out at the crowd, families laughing, couples holding hands, kids sneaking bites of warm rolls, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Present, not used, not tolerated, not background noise. I had walked away, not to be dramatic, not to make a statement, but to survive. To find myself again. And in the warmth of a tiny kitchen and the kindness of a neighbor who saw me, I did. If Helen's story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home or found strength in walking away, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters too. We read everyone. And if you'd like to hear more real, powerful stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is a space for the quiet voices, the everyday heroes, and the moments we rarely talk about. But never forget, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is finally put yourself first.